Straight Talk. It's our 15th episode. You can watch on our website, familyfirstnz. You can watch on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, even on Twitter, where Spark is currently feeling the love at the moment. We are everywhere. And if you're on Facebook or YouTube, you can share your comments to the panel and submit any questions that you may have. Without further ado, let's welcome the panel. And it's the famous five today. Firstly, to my left, immediate left, is Bruce in Christchurch. How are you, Bruce?
I'm fine. How are you? And all, no problems.
Very good. Ronji is further to the left there, always on the left. How are you, Ronji?
What's up, everyone? Good to see everyone.
Well done. And straight below is Sri Trotter from the far north. It's less wild there because we lost contact with you last week, Sri, but good connection this week.
Good connection. It's still raining, but it's not windy this time. So, yeah, it's a bonus.
Okay. Christine in Taupo, how are you?
Good evening. All good. Thank you, Bob.
Okay. Lovely background this week once again.
Thank
and finally, Ala, evening to you.
Evening, everyone.
How many weeks to go are we counting down, Ala? Is it, what is it? 8
I
weeks?
think it's eight or 9.
Very
I'm
exciting.
trying to get comfortable. My back is sore.
Yeah.
Oh.
Okay. Look, I always find that we start to run out of the time at the end of the hour, and Ronji starts giving me dirty looks. So we're not going to muck around tonight. So we're going to get straight into the free speech moment. And Bruce, you are going to kick us off. And your topic tonight, well, I've desexed both my Labrador dogs, but you want to talk tonight about desexing the person. So your free speech moment starts now.
Well, it's ironic that the cult of diversity and inclusion emphasizing the de-sexed abstraction personhood, or Justin Trudeau's person kind, completely misunderstands what it means to be a man or a woman. It's neither diverse nor inclusive. None of us can imagine a person. Try, and you'll come up with a man or a woman. The morality plays of the Middle Ages knew that, for example. One of the best surviving plays, Every Man, was certainly inclusive. Every man included every man, woman and child, because they all shared a common humanity. Every man is an allegorical figure of flawed human nature, as men, women and children struggle to find salvation on their pilgrimage. Plague, pestilence and poverty were always hovering in the wings. Personhood was no mere abstraction. Everyone knew the reality of sin, salvation, and the interaction between the material and spiritual worlds. The problem of identity was solved. Life was a real struggle for flesh and blood, not just a suffocating exercise in psychological or political theory that would conflate male with female. If we don't grasp that in New Zealand, I suspect the citizens of Ukraine certainly do. With almost 2 million refugees, overwhelmingly overwhelmingly women and children, they knew the essential difference between men and women. And they know the essential difference between men and women. Sacrifice, suffering, and the hope of salvation, not the anti-science conceit of political and sexual identity, has a habit of restoring us to the reality of our spiritual infirmity and the God-given dignity that would make sense of all of that. Think about it.
Very good. Thank you, Bruce. Right, let's go to Christine and Taupo. And your topic is, well, it's a big surprise. Is that the topic or is that what you want to talk about? A big surprise anyway. Your free speech moment starts now.
Thank you, Bob. I've decided I'm going to attend most political events in Taupo, not Labour. I've had enough. I think I know enough. But all the rest I'm determined to attend. And I was really surprised this week because we had Chris Luxon in town, and it was a huge surprise for me. Firstly, the place was packed to the gunnels and they had to open the doors. There were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people there. But he really surprised me. He's not the way I thought he was at all, and I have a very different impression of him now. He doesn't look the way he looks on television, and he doesn't come across the way that he comes across on television, which is a real shame. And I felt very surprised that at the end of it, I knew that while he did not offer me some of the things that I would like, and I know some of the things that the viewers here would like, he's going to run this country really well. Do you know that he was the first person in his family to get a degree? He came from a working class family, and when he started work, He just happened to be really, really good at his job. And we had a supporter in the audience. In fact, we had a lot. And one of them stood up and asked, was he going to allow kids at school to be faced with sexuality that they were not ready for and was not necessary under any circumstances, like 169 different sexualities they could be? And he said, absolutely not. This is what we will be concentrating on. Now, I did not expect that answer from him. And I have to say, the whole time, I was really impressed. He told the truth, whether people liked it or not, about what he intended to do. And I've had an epiphany about what he's really about. He certainly doesn't come across so well on television. Very impressive in person. And I was pleased to see that he had the courage to deny something that is very, very, very popular at the moment. And I was proud of our supporter who had the courage to ask the question.
Okay, very good. We'll be coming back to that topic in our first topic tonight. So very interesting. Right, Bob, your free speech moment starts now. There was a disturbing article in the New Zealand Doctor magazine last week which said that if a person applying for euthanasia under our new law was declined, either because they weren't terminal or didn't meet the criteria, then the patient was at a higher risk of suicidal thoughts. Now, this was from psychiatrist and University of Auckland senior lecturer Gary Chung speaking at a recent medical conference. And he highlighted two cases: a 79-year-old with pancreatic cancer who lived alone. The patient contacted his doctor and inquired about assisted suicide, but he didn't meet the criteria because his condition was not deemed irreversible. The man went home and attempted suicide twice before health professionals followed up and organised a mental health referral and respite care in a rest home, what he really needed. The second case was a 96-year-old who had recently lost his wife. Now, despite having no chronic illness, he applied for assisted suicide and was denied. Shortly after, the man was lonely and desperate and attempted suicide. He was moved into residential care and prescribed antidepressant medication, what he really needed. A New Zealand government report on euthanasia 6 years ago said, quote, many submitters were concerned that if assisted dying was legalised, people would see death as an acceptable response to suffering, end quote. The Scottish Parliament report on assisted suicide in 2015 concluded, quote, there appears to be a contradiction between a policy objective of preventing suicide on the one hand and on the other, legislation which would provide for some suicides to be assisted and facilitated, end quote. You see, folks, laws permitting assisted suicide send a message that suicide is a reasonable or appropriate way out of dealing with suffering. But suicide is already a public health crisis. You don't discourage suicide by assisting suicide. That's why our euthanasia law is deeply dangerous. Cherie, your topic for tonight is, you want to talk about Marama Davidson, our favourite Green MP who was on Q&A. Your free speech moment starts now.
Thanks, Bob. Yesterday, the Minister for the Prevention of Family and Sexual Violence, Marama Davidson, claimed, quote, no instance of violence is acceptable. However, when questioned about the way Posie Parker was treated, she could not bring herself to condemn the actions of the person who poured a tin of tomatoes over Parker. She said she didn't support harassment, but diverted blame to Parker herself for the values she stood for. Trying to get a straight answer out of the Green Party co-leader was like trying to pin jelly to a wall. Davidson claimed that Parker was trying to impose values that stood against our Aotearoa values, such as manaakitanga, aroha, whānau, whakapapa, and valuing all people, including trans people, end quote. The people who were not valued that day were the New Zealand women who had come to express their concerns, such as the right to organise and gather in safe, sex-segregated spaces, and the unfairness of competing in sports against biological men. Davidson believes the way to deal with those who have a different view is by, quote, crowding that out, end quote, shouting that out. She rejected the idea that one could have a civil conversation about trans-related issues. On the morning of the Posie Parker rally, I started getting texts from my daughter who'd gone along to see what it was all about. Describing that day, she said, it was really scary, the heaviest environment I've been in. Basically, a mob of crazy people banging on pots and pans. People had horns and whistles, parents with kids on their shoulders screaming, F you, Posie. Really bizarre, very hostile. This is what Davidson calls a display of aroha. It's an example of the type of crowding out that she advocates. Is this the type of civil behaviour Kiwis should condone or aspire to? Should we accept the reframing of thuggery, mob violence and abuse as aroha? While clear-thinking people will not be persuaded by Davidson's manipulation of words, the effect of the Overton window means that her words do have influence on other politicians and journalists by silencing them or shifting their view further towards a radical position. In the face of this nonsense, people need to have the courage to speak up. We should be asking politicians some obvious questions. Do they believe adults ought to behave like adults and engage in civil conversation? Do they support a woman's right to safety via a sex-segregated space? Do they support the right of women to voice their concerns in a rational manner? Do they believe in biology? Do they have courage to stand against this deeply misogynistic and unscientific trend?
Very good. It makes me want to go and watch
Very
that interview now, although I'm not sure if I will get through it without raised blood pressure. Ronji, a final say for Free Speech Moment, and your topic is grace and salt. Go for it.
Yeah, sure. Well, the Apostle Paul says in Colossians 4 that when we engage with non-Christians, our words and our conversation must be full of grace but seasoned with salt, not full of salt and sprinkled with some grace. On Saturday, as we did some evangelism in the Mangere markets, I had a 40-minute conversation with a devout Muslim man, debating the differences between the Bible and the Quran, between Islam and Christianity. It was a heated debate. I would not back down from the gospel message and Jesus Christ being fully man and fully God, and neither would he back down from his beliefs. At the end, we agreed that we were both seeking truth, and we planned to have a coffee, hopefully soon, to keep this discussion going. After that, we shook hands. I thought of those words from the Apostle Paul, let our words be full of grace and seasoned with salt. Even though we live in such a fragile society where people scream outrage and being offended and throw their toys out and sook when they don't get their own way, we must remain willing enough to have courageous conversations and stand for what is true, beautiful, and right, no matter what the cost is. Yes, there's only two genders. Yes, marriage is one man, one woman. Yes, there is an objective, absolute standard of truth. And no, I will not live by the lies of this world. And when we have these courageous conversations, let our words be full of grace and seasoned with salt. Let's disagree with respect, and let's not back down from our convictions.
Very good. Thank you, Ronji. Right, let's get straight into the topics because Ronji is watching his clock. And firstly, let's just discuss the polls because it is neck and neck. There is 96 days to go till Election Day, folks. I don't know if that scares you a little bit. But the poll of polls shows, now, if you look down the bottom there, if you average out all the polls, it shows National and Labour both on 34%, ACT on 12%, Greens on 8%, Māori on 4%, and New Zealand First on 2.7%. But of course, we've got all the campaigns to come. And then if you look at the right and left-wing blocks, so right-wing block is Nats and ACT, which is shown in the blue line up the top there, and Labour, Greens and Māori Party is the red line. It is very even, and Winston could still be the kingmaker. So questions for the panel. What do you think is going to ultimately decide the outcome of this election? And I'm interested to know also, just as you've watched a number of senior Labour MPs, cabinet ministers sort of trip over, has Chris Hipkins lost control of his senior MPs, or has he inherited the problem from Jacinda? So, Ala, I'll come to you first. What's going to predict the outcome? What do we yet to see, do you think?
I think polls should always be taken with a grain of salt, personally. I think it's going to turn out to be voters turning up on the day voting. That's what it's going to come down to. It always has been. I think National's got a few more policies to come out. I think their med school one got a few more looks, I guess, from voters that are undecided, but it will come down to a battle of centre left and centre right, but it'll ultimately And it always has been with elections. It'll matter who turns up on the day to vote. So let's hope that it's not a million people that do not turn up to vote. So yeah.
Well, do you think last election, of course, they had the referendum on cannabis, and of course that attracted out a very young vote because they all wanted to vote on the referendum, and that helped some of the parties. Do you think we're going to see that this time? Do you think the young people will still come out? Are they still motivated?
I really want to be optimistic, but I think in terms of our selection of leaders that young people have to pick from, personally, like my age group, millennials, there's no one really sort of that's a standout. They're National and Labour are both the same sides of different sides of the same coin. I think we're looking at like our most lackluster generation of political leaders, to be honest. Like I remember Helen Clark and her generation when I was an intermediate, because they were politicians with convictions, even if they were standing for things that I wasn't in agreement with as a 12-year-old, but they all stood out and they seemed to have a backbone. I don't know if our politicians have a backbone today, or maybe it's just what we're seeing in the media.
Yeah.
I'm hopeful
Bruce,
that young people will turn out. So
yeah. Okay. Bruce, you've sat through, and I'm not being ageist here, but you've seen a number of election campaigns. What are we yet to see? I mean, how much do you think the campaigns and the debates are going to make any difference?
Well, I'm sure they will make a difference. If Christine is right, they might make a significant difference, and I suspect she is. There are a couple of things that occur to me, and I wonder about. I wonder if those people who are presently contemplating voting for a minor party might realise that, and they will. Some of them will. Well, I'm not sure that's a preponderance of them or not. Will be conservative, but those people of a conservative frame of mind who are thinking about voting for a minor party might see Winston getting close and wonder, maybe I should put my vote to New Zealand first. And that might be something that's going to happen. And I think that's a real possibility. The polls are certainly, they look as though they're misleading. I don't know whether we're following the Trumpian deal of the way the polls went there, but and in England too, they weren't all that great. But however, and so maybe they are misleading. I don't know, and I don't know how they do the recording now. The Maori Party, of course, will be a wild card. I'm not quite sure how that's going to go. But the Maori Party, with this sort of reinforced concept of partnership, may well turn out to be a kingmaker. I hope not, but it could well be.
Okay. Christine, you've been in at government level. You've seen how this all sort of works. Do you think Chris Hipkins is losing control of his cabinet, or did he inherit a bit of a shambles?
He inherited it. I really do believe that. I think I've said this before, but the issue with Labor is they're well-intentioned, and I even though I disagree vehemently with many of their policies, I do believe that they see it as doing good. But they've never run anything. They're career politicians. Very few of them have ever had a career. They've never been leaders in anything except politically, and they don't know how to do things, and they've really stuffed it up. And you've got people like Kerry Allen loaded with responsibilities, someone who has never done that before, and the pressures are enormous down there. You know, I always call it a snake pit, and who wants to be part of a snake pit? It's cutthroat, it's nasty, and it's very, very demanding. And yeah, I think Jacinda left him with, she knew what she was leaving, and she left him with one hell of a pot of mess. And I believe the polls are wrong. I think there's going to be a landslide right-wing victory. I don't know if you heard Paddy Gower say the other morning, and I was surprised it was coming from him on the AM show. He was with Barry Soper, and he said all National has to do is get a whiteboard and write on it for the population, be afraid, be very, very afraid. They don't need to go into any more policies. They just have to talk about Te Pāti Māori, the Green Party and Labour mixed together, and what it will do to us combined with the last 6 years, and there will be a landslide, and I think there will be anyway. I think the people are turning out now. I think people are being very quiet. They're afraid to voice their opinion because labels are very powerful these days. but it's there. I've never seen so many people in Taupo attend a meeting in my life. I've been here 8 years, so I shouldn't say in my life. I've seen lots of meetings. I've never seen hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, so that they had to open the Great Lakes Centre up to allow people in.
Was there as many as
So I think you're
when
going to see some big changes.
Was there as many as when Nick and I came down for the No Means No tour 3 years ago?
I'm sorry, Bob. It didn't quite match up.
No, probably
I
not.
Maybe
wish
if you
it
ran for
had.
national board.
Yeah, they must have been
I
offering
wish
food
it
at the
had,
National
but
Party.
it didn't, Bobby.
Okay,
You had a
Ron.
much more important message.
Oh, exactly, and we won. Ronji, what do you think's going to swing, or who's going to come out in front?
Look, it's still really too early in my view. I think the polls, I'm a little bit suspicious of the polls and who's doing them, the margins of error. You got to always look at the margins of error. So I'm a little bit sus about that. It's still early. There's a whole bunch of water left to go under that bridge. And so I think the thing that I'm interested in watching is hoping and that National doesn't balls it up, because basically they've got all the momentum. They've got all the ability, as Christine said. If they just need to focus on some of that bad stuff, dodgy stuff that the left bloc are doing. And so I think what I'm really interested in is the fact that I don't think people see National, a lot of people are seeing National as a viable option, especially those who have been alienated by the lack of social and moral conservatism in the party nowadays. And so, you got the small parties coming in. So it's a real mixture. So I think, and then you've got the magician that is Winnie, Uncle Winnie, coming in with New Zealand First as well. So there's a lot left to happen. There's the TV debates. I think one of the real kickers is that people will vote early. So I actually think the campaigns need to start getting earlier, because I think the majority in the last election, I think it was a COVID election, obviously, but they voted before the actual election day. So strategists in the political parties need to focus on making sure that they time their runs well.
Yeah. Okay, Sheree, what do you think's going to be the tipping point?
Well, I agree with Ronji that I think it's still a bit early to say. I mean, Labor's not looking good at the moment. ACT, of course, is really doing well. And so that's an interesting one to watch. It's interesting what Christine is saying about the way Luxon comes across in person, because he certainly doesn't come across that way on TV. So, I think politicians need to be out there sort of beating the streets and getting in front of people so that people can get a sense of who they are. I think there is a lot of interest in some of the minor parties, and there are a lot of small meetings going on around the country and people turning up to see what's going on there. So, I think it's still early days, really.
Okay, and perhaps I can put this question to you first. Do you think New Zealand First can make the 5% cut? Because that would throw a real wild card in.
Well, they're currently around 3%, so that's quite a big jump. You can never say never with Winston Peters, but he has disappointed a lot of his loyal followers, and whether they would have the courage to believe him again, I'm not sure that they would. So again, I think it's hard to say.
Okay, I'm sorry that Ashley's not with us. Hopefully he'll be back next week, but I'd love to put this question to him. But Ala, you might be able to fill us in. Do you think when he's going to be able to get the team up and get the 5%?
Uncle Winnie is relentless, and a character like him is always needed in politics, to be honest, just to keep everyone else on their toes. I think he makes for great entertainment in the house when it comes to question time. As someone who likes watching question time, but I think a character like him, he's saying all the right things for the audience and for those that they've lost over the years. So I think if he keeps on that track, they're most likely going to make that 5%. But never say
Christine?
never with Uncle Winnie.
No, that's right. Christine, do you think when he can do it? Because he is he's the ultimate campaigner.
Yeah, he really is, and you can never strike him off. I hope he doesn't make it, because, while I often like what he says, he never keeps his word. He just doesn't deliver on the things that he says he's going to. I like the sound of several of the things he says, but he's never delivered anything that I was really impressed with. It's all a game. And, you know, we're in a lot of trouble. Our country's in a lot of trouble. We don't need another game player. We need serious, capable people. They might not be totally appealing, but, you know, that's what I'm going for this time. The serious ones who are really capable of turning things around, or we're going to get to a point where there's no turning back. Morally and ethically, I don't think there's any turning back. I really don't. I don't think abortion's going to change. I don't think euthanasia is going to change. It's going to get more liberal. Once they change the moral fabric, going back is virtually impossible. And, you know, not very long ago, we got a Conservative Party almost over the line. In fact, we would have done it if there wasn't some tragic things that happened close to the end. And I often wonder, would we really have been able to make a difference? I don't know, but we certainly had the right heart and the right policy, I believe.
Okay, Ronja, you're nodding your head a lot. Is that because you're saying we need Winnie, or you don't think he can make it? You think we need Winnie? It's a yes.
No. I'm calling it. I'm calling it. I reckon he's going to make it in. I don't think we need him, and I think he's going to play off. And the dynamics between him and Te Pāti Māori is actually going to be really interesting, because I think he's going to leverage off that kind of sentiment that people have against the Māori Party and their policies. So he is a seasoned campaigner. He knows what he's doing. I reckon he'll get in. I share the concerns of the panel. I think he is a man that doesn't keep his word. But I said yes because I think he will get in, because he knows how this game is played.
Okay, yep. Bruce, final verdict on Winnie?
Well, I hope he does get in. Is that a final word?
Okay, we will take it. Are you predicting that? Because he's made it clear. Has he made it clear that he's not going to go with?
Yes,
he won't
has.
go with National. He won't go with Labour.
Parliament needs him just for his colour, and I don't mean the colour of his skin. I mean the colour of his wit.
Yeah.
I agree.
Okay. Now, let me just cover one other issue before we move off this. And News Talk ZB's Mike Hosking, he wrote a column, which I sent through to you panellists, and he said this: the so-called radical right collection of minor players won't get anywhere either, but they may collectively get between 1% and 2% more votes in the bin. He reckons New Zealand First won't make the threshold and will get about 3%. So therefore, that will be about 5% wasted. And he's basically referring to this list of parties: Democracy NZ, Freedoms NZ, Leighton Baker Party, Liz Gunn's New Zealand Loyal, which has just started, New Conservative, New Zealand First, One Party, and there's also a Women's Rights Party that's just in the process of registering. Panel, do you agree with Mike Hosking's comment that it is just so splintered on that side that not a single one of them is going to actually make the finish line? Ala, what do you think?
Yeah, I have to agree. I think they're wasted votes. I don't understand why there's so many of them. I do, but I don't, and I don't want to understand. I at this stage, like, I can't understand why they all can't get together and find common ground, because they're just going to pull away important votes. So, and we're too small of a country. Like, I think New Zealand often thinks it punches above its weight in certain ways, and no, I just not when it comes to things like politics. I think they need to they'd do more power, they'd do more damage together in terms of being able to collaborate and find common ground. I think they'd be able to get more voters, but at this stage I don't see them cracking even the 1%, to be honest.
Okay, Christine, why don't you think they can come together? Why is it so splintered?
There's some real specifics in there. Has Leighton Baker called his party the Leighton Baker Party?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but one person does not make up a political party. I've never heard of one before. Imagine calling it the Donald Trump Party or the... I don't know. He must have lost his senses. That's just craziness. That'll lose a heck of a lot. This is not about one person. This is about, isn't it, about a team? But no, his
argument is that there's name recognition. So if he'd called himself Democracy Wins Party, nobody will know it.
Not politically sensible, in my opinion. But no, I think they're all wasted votes. It's such a shame.
Okay, Cherie, are they all wasted votes, or can something happen through this?
Well, something can always happen, I suppose, but the way it's looking at the moment is not great. The trajectory is not great. Yeah, you know, they need to be able to come together to get across the line. So, yeah, I don't know. It's just a really, really tricky one. At the moment, it looks like they're wasted votes, sadly.
Okay. Ronji, what do you reckon?
I don't think they're wasted votes, because people, if they're voting for those parties, then they're voting according to their values and to the fact that their value system and their ideas align with those policies. If the purpose was to get rid of Labour, then it's a wasted vote, because they're not going to get across that threshold. And I think the danger is that Nationals alienating voters all the time, and they just can't see that much of a difference between Labour and National. So for those who are socially, morally conservative, who are alienated by the National Party and who hate Labour, they're looking for options. And so whether that option is New Zealand First or that long list of right-leaning splinter parties or smaller parties, yeah, that's why they're heading there. I think that the challenge is that there are some of those that are trying to organize some sort of collaboration together or some sort of body together to try and get across the threshold. But I don't see it happening. But look, if people vote according to their value systems, I think it's a good vote. Go hard.
Okay, I guess just finally, Bruce. Yeah, go on, Christine.
Could I just add there, you know, they might be voting based on their values, but they risk 3 years of a morally corrupt party who's going to just add to our social problems and the disintegration of society the way we believe it should be. So in voting for their values, they're actually going to lose so much of what is precious to them, because watch what happens in the next 3 years if we have more of the same. It's all just going to be solidified and growing. It scares me.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you, Christine. I think the thing is they can't see a viable option in National. That's the problem.
Yeah.
You close
I
your
know.
eyes, National and Labour look exactly the same. And so I think that's the problem. That's why they're running. I totally agree with you. And I hope that they don't waste their vote, as we've talked about. But the reality is there's not much difference between
They
those
may
two
well.
big parties. And so they're looking for options.
Well, they're
Yeah, and I
not
think-
communicating the difference.
No, and I think the other
Well,
thing is that all of those parties, if you look at their values, as Ronji you're referring to, a lot of them have very similar values. The one major thing that separates them is the fact that they've got different names for their parties, but a lot of their values, a lot of their policies are very similar. Bruce, once again,
that's what
can we
I was
get them
mumbling.
across the line?
That's what I was mumbling about before. That if you look at the minor parties, and if you're thinking of voting for a minor party, and you really want to get rid of the present government, you might think, well, it would be better to vote for something that looks like a Conservative party. And if you look at the voting record of all the leaders, the closest we have to a Conservative, irrespective of what you might think about Winston otherwise, his voting is quite good. So you might decide, instead of voting for a minor party, it would be more sensible for me to vote for a party like New Zealand First, for example, and get it across the line, and so that it was on at least a party that was opposing the Labor Green coalition.
Yeah,
and I think that would be
You
quite
have to,
sensible.
you have to remember. We have to remember, though, that it was New Zealand First that brought in the Labor Greens. So, you know, this is what people have to grapple with, is the integrity of the person, of the leader. And if National were thinking, they would be doing more to appeal to the Conservatives, because there's a big group of them. And, you know, if they were standing up more strongly for Conservative values, then they might get a few more of those votes.
Well,
so, Cherie, would you trust Winston if he says, I'm not going with Labor? Would that get your vote?
Look, I've sat across the table from Winston on issues like Israel and confronted him over what seemed to be a backtrack there. And the record is there. He doesn't follow through with what he says. Based on the record, that's what we have to deal with. He doesn't keep his promises. So I wouldn't recommend voting for him based on that. Sorry, Winston.
Okay, let's move on because I'm sure we're going to come back to this topic. I mean, with all those minor parties, all we can hope for is maybe some unity and synergy at some stage because it seems possibly the only solution. Anyway, let's move on. Life Education Trust now targeting Year 8 children, 11 to 13-year-olds with, as you can see in their letter to parents of this particular school, which we haven't identified, with gender and sexual orientation, gender unicorn, LGBTQIA plus gender stereotyping. Life Education Trust was always considered a safe program, but it's gone down the radical path of sexuality and gender confusion. Look, I just want to ask the panel, does this surprise you, and is this the cost of receiving government funding? Christine, what do you think? Is government funding talking here?
Yeah, I think it absolutely is. It doesn't surprise me. Look, I've never thought about them having this kind of dogma, but I guess I am shocked. I would never have thought it would extend that far, and it has, and it is part of getting government funding. You know, when you sign a contract to get government money, you sign away a lot of your rights. You can't be independent anymore. You can never criticise the government. And a lot of the money they're handing out are massive amounts, so people want it and they play the game.
Yeah. Yeah, and I thought Life Education Trust, I mean, that was Trevor Grice's baby, wasn't it? And it was always built around the whole alcohol and drug harm. Ronji, is the money talking, government funding talking, or are they just following the pack? And we've, you know, in terms of working in schools, we're going to fight really uphill battle on this one.
Yeah, I probably think it's a bit of both. I don't know much about the Life Education Trust, but I think when you're receiving government money, you're beholden to the master, right? And so you have gag orders on you. There's different things that you can and cannot do, especially around advocacy. And so, Bob, you would know that with your court cases. And so I think that's the challenge. Really, is when you're receiving government funding, you're going to be following whatever the master says. The other part, though, is I think it's a bit of the other side where it's almost like groups and corporates and companies almost running to bow the knee to the woke bullies, to be honest. It's almost like it's a whole bunch of virtue signaling in my view. They're just, oh, that guy's doing it, that means I should do it. So it makes us look good, and it makes us look good to other customers. So I don't think the battle is over when it comes to our schools, though. I think of what I said before, that it is our words full of grace and seasoned with salt. But I think that's where I've mentioned throughout Straight Talk around homeschooling numbers. We need to make sure that homeschooling movement is a strong movement that's supported. There's charter schools, special character schools that we should be supporting as well. Parents getting involved in the curriculum, joining the boards of the schools for their kids, making sure that they're right involved in terms of what's happening with their schools. And I also think that it's a challenge to church groups as well to say, well, how are they responding to the education of their kids? I love the vacation Bible school model that happens in the US, where they're teaching some wonderful things and they take it away from the public school environment and they do it within the church and community setting. So I don't think the battle is over, but I think this is just part and parcel of getting falling to the woke bullies and getting government money.
Okay, Ala, were you surprised to see this development?
No, not really. It was only a matter of time, I guess. I'm disappointed, but I mean, this particular type of the gender madness and also the RSC, the relationships and sexuality education module, has been around for a number of years now. So it is no surprise that it's sort of surfaced into these groups. I think it's also important that people know that there is no neutrality in education. There never has been, nor ever will be. For myself as a Christian, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. So for me personally, like, you can't educate apart from Christ in any justifiable or meaningful way. So for me, it starts at home. It's important that parents, one, are aware of these things, but also teach your children the truth of Christ and God's word, and it begins at home. I think that's one way to counter this as well, but also to double down on what Ronji said. Those are some practical ways that parents and communities can also push back, because a lot of all this that MOE is pushing out, they need to do it according to consultation. I don't know what that looks like, whether it's just online or with, but parents, they're your children. You can't be passive about your children's education or what's influencing them. You can't trust the state anymore, not that we could ever historically, really. So it's important that parents, communities, churches in particular take back this responsibility that's been given to us, and it begins at home.
Yeah. And to be fair, when I first posted this on social media, a couple of teachers contacted me to say that, look, it still depends on the school. They can ask for what they want Life Education Trust to cover. It was just that in this particular school, they wanted this and the Life Education Trust was offering it. Christine, have you had involvement with Life Education Trust previously, or Trevor Grice?
A long time ago, a very long time ago.
Yeah.
And it was always something really impressive. And I remember my
Yeah.
grandkids, when it first used to go to their school, they loved it. And it was very innocent. There was nothing like this at all. Nothing.
Bruce, any
Very
surprise
sad.
or?
Well, no, it is a bit of a surprise to me, because I remember when Life Education Trust began and talking to Trevor Grice, and he was a conservative who really understood the roots of conservatism. So they've obviously had a change of personnel, and in many ways they represent what's going on in the culture, and for them to have stood up against that would be very difficult. They haven't stuck to their guns like Family First has, for example, but I think it's because there's a failure to understand their roots, and I just don't mean the roots of the Life Education Trust, but those roots that gave life to the Education Trust.
Yeah.
And obviously that's gone. And so they just follow the general drift that's going on in the culture.
Yeah, I mean, I first came across him when I was a youth worker in South Auckland, and this is the late 90s. And of course, his book was The Great Brain Robbery, What Everyone Should Know About Teenagers and Drugs. And of course, you know, that was kind of like where it all started from. So sad to see. Okay, let's move on, team. Alcohol is the most harmful drug in New Zealand, outranking all those nasties like pee and cocaine, and methamphetamine, according to research from the University of Otago, which of course is where Ala used to go. Here is the One News coverage of the story.
The most harmful drugs in New Zealand have been ranked for the first time, and the results are surprising many. Alcohol has the dubious honour of being in the top spot in an Otago University study, outranking illegal substances. Lisa Davies has more.
Introducing our most harmful substance.
I can't believe that is the most harmful drug. Can you?
I was going to say pee.
Alcohol obviously kills people, right?
And that's helped push it to the top of these charts, ahead of other drugs like methamphetamine and synthetic cannabis.
The colours really refer to different types of harm, and you can see that there's just a very large array of harms that are caused by alcohol.
This legal substance can cause chronic medical and psychological harm, hurting families and communities.
Okay, now you'll see the co-author there, which is also from Ala's University, Otago, Joe Bowden, not Biden, Bowden, same country though. Joe Bowden is a well-known pro-cannabis legalisation campaigner and even says in the media coverage that we should legalise all drugs, despite the obvious difference that alcohol is a legal drug. And of course, the media rush off to the Drug Foundation, of course, who also failed to acknowledge that maybe the legality and the fact that our culture is awash with alcohol is a key consideration, but it is. Just have a watch of this clip.
Availability wasn't a factor in the rankings.
I think the ranking will come as a surprise to a lot of New Zealanders because we have tended to assume that the legality of a substance has something to do with its harmfulness.
Some of the damage it causes is being attributed to our antiquated laws.
Of course, you know, there is one solution to all of these issues, which is legalization and regulation of all of these substances.
The Misuse of Drugs Act, it's almost 50 years old. It comes from a bygone era of the war on drugs.
Yes, bygone era, regulate. Don't tell them that the potency of their favourite drug, cannabis, has exploded. And of course, nobody's saying, well, gee, how's the regulation of alcohol going? Because it's a disaster. To One News's credit, they actually gave the counter view in this story, a very short clip.
This former drinker says pricing, availability and marketing need to be tackled.
Please stop the marketing, the billboards, the ads that show it as this glossy, magical liquid when it's just not for so many people.
So there we go, a little bit of balance. Now, just before I go to the panel, here's the categories that they base the harm on. And as you read these, apply any drug to this test. Accessibility, dependency, impaired judgment, health effects, shortened life expectancy, risk of birth defects, damaged relationships, economic burden, and crime. Take any drug, they all fail. Just one other thing, team. This was the report of the study in the hard copy of the New Zealand Herald. Check out the bottom half of the page. It was filled with an advert for alcohol and cheap as prices. So there we go. There's a bit of logic. Good placement. Right. So questions for the panel. Do you agree with the study? Is alcohol our most harmful drug? And does legality and availability matter? Ronji, you were a key campaigner for the Vote No campaign. Is alcohol the harmful drug that we need to be most worried about?
I don't know if we need to be, if it's the one that we need to be most worried about. I think all drugs and illegal substances that cause that kind of harm, we need to be worried about. The thing with alcohol is that legality and availability is absolutely key, especially when you look at poorer communities where they're saturated with bottle stores and liquor stores and off licenses already. I think the thing that most New Zealanders drink responsibly and moderately, I get that. But hazardous drinking behaviours have increased over the last 10 years across all ages, most ages, and across most people groups. I think about 20% of adults drink hazardously. And I think the real key around alcohol harm is actually around tax excise. Because you can do all the other stuff that you want to do around education, advertising, and that kind of stuff. But it's really a tax thing. And it's not the nicest thing to say, I'm sure, to some of the viewers who don't want more taxes when it comes to alcohol. But see, the thing is that alcohol brings in about $1.2 billion worth of government revenue per year, but it's actually associated to about $8 billion worth of social harm every year. And so I think when it comes to trying to reduce the harm of alcohol, it's really a tax aim. The same way that we tax the hell out of tobacco is probably the only way that you can try and get some real reduction in the harm that alcohol causes if you go after the tax excise.
Okay. Cherie, is alcohol the worst harm, or is it just because the culture is awash?
Well, we do have a drinking culture, and across all parts of our society, there's the more socially acceptable kind of drinking, the whiskey tasting, the craft beers, all of that. There's the binge drinking, amongst the youth, and not just youth. I think there's a need for education about the harms. I think a lot of people don't really understand the physical harms, the health effects of drinking alcohol. But I also think that we need to look at what is driving the drinking. Why are people drinking so much? And if you've got an alcohol problem, if you've got an alcoholic, it doesn't really matter how much it's going to cost. They're going to try and get that alcohol because they're addicted to it. And so I think we need to be looking at the causes of alcoholism and what's driving the alcohol culture.
Yeah. Okay. And I mean, Family First has always been part of the Alcohol Action 5+ solution, which is about raising price, raising age, reducing the whole advertising and accessibility, targeting drink driving, and increasing treatment availability, plus the health warnings like cigarettes. Christine, is alcohol the social problem, or is it simply because it's legal? And as Kevin Sabet said at the Forum on the Family, what do we expect when we legalise it?
I think the study was sort of manipulative because they're not looking to take alcohol away. They're looking to add everything else to the list. Yeah. So I just see it as manipulative. And I don't think any government's going to put many restrictions around alcohol. Once again, it's going to come back to personal responsibility and personal support around somebody. And when I look at the disgusting things that P does, I just find it really difficult to believe that alcohol is worse than that. P is the most destructive thing that has ever happened to our society, in my opinion. And I just don't see that it could possibly be better than alcohol.
Yeah, that was one of our arguments during the cannabis referendum was we've already seen one social disaster in terms of how alcohol has caused so many social problems. Why add another one, which is kind of what the argument that Joe Bowden has been arguing. Ala, coming from Otago University, are you for the study or?
Again, I think I'm echoing what everyone else has already said. I think when you look a little bit closely into their methodology, it is very subjective. It's up to a panel. They don't look at certain quantifiable things as well, like in terms of association between dosage and what and the drug and certain things like that. So I found that odd, even just at a first read. It's unfortunate that the way it's been presented is to negate things. Yeah, I guess it's trying to take attention away from things like pee and cannabis. So I'm really surprised that it got published, but also not surprised because our academic world has been taken over by lots of loonies, lefty loonies.
Yeah.
I don't think I can have a nicer term.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay. Bruce, do you want to round that off?
Well, I tend to agree with Christine. I think it certainly appears to be manipulative. And because alcohol's legal, then other drugs should be legal as well, which seems to be the implication. But a couple of things I think I better say before I forget. Alcohol's been with us for a very long time, and it's not going to go away. And I think it's worthwhile making a distinction between alcohol and other drugs. One tends to, first of all, the first thing I suppose one should say is you're probably better off not drinking at all. Maybe being a teetotaler is the wisest thing of all. But if you are going to drink, I think it's worthwhile remembering that one tends to drink to be sociable. Drinking alcohol is an exercise in being sociable with others. Most drugs, if not all other drugs, tend to isolate one. And that has a significant difference on the outcomes and how that affects society and the individual. So I suspect when we're talking about expense, in the long run, we'll find that the other drugs, when they become as pervasive as alcohol is, then they might also be a lot more expensive and cost the country a great deal more money than they do at present. And anyway, that seems to be the way it's going in those parts of the United States where drugs have become legal. It seems to be the way things are developing. So, but I think it is significant that the reason we drink, I think, is quite different from the reason that we take other drugs.
Okay, well done, team. Final topic. We're making great time. We'll have Ronji in bed by 9:01. A new study released last week at the International Boys School Conference held at Westlake Boys High School found that boys at single-sex schools tend to leave school with higher qualifications than boys at co-ed schools. And this contradicts the traditionally held belief that boys do better in co-ed schools and apparently girls fare better in single-sex settings. Overall, the data showed that half of boys at single-sex schools left with university entrance, but only 30% of boys at co-ed schools. And there was a study done about girls in 2020. Girls at single-sex schools topped girls from co-ed schools on nearly all academic measures and social and emotional outcomes. The report was commissioned by the Alliance of Girls' Schools Australasia. No vested interest, of course, and it was part of an international schools study. So, well, perhaps panel, we could just get a raised hand. How many of you went to a single-sex school? Okay, so Christine and Bruce, if I can start with you two, do you think, Christine, do you think you benefited from a single-sex school?
Yeah, absolutely. A little bit later when we moved to Auckland, I went to a co-ed school and, you know, I was 15 or something and your boys were a big distraction. So yes, it was much better to be at a girls' school. It was very different. It really was. And my boys have gone to single-sex schools. I think it's great for both girls and boys, and I would advocate for it. I know there can be some social benefits to mixing, but apart from that.
Do you think the social costs of mixing is the problem, though? Is that what you're getting at? Are you saying that the opposite sex being at the school is a distraction?
You're going through puberty. It's a really difficult time and you don't need any extra distractions. I think when you're at a single-sex school, oh, mind you, today there are how many? 149 sexes. So maybe we're going to have many schools for many different people. I don't know, but yeah, I think it is. That's one distraction that's not there during the day.
Okay,
Maybe
Bruce,
on
do
the
you
school
think
bus on the way home.
Bruce, do you think you benefited from boys only school?
Yes, perhaps I did, although I think I'd make a rider on that society's changed since I went to school. And the difference between boys' education and girls' education was different then. What's happened to the process? By the way, this understanding of boys doing better in boys' schools has been around for 20, 30 years. We've known that for a long time.
Yeah.
But boys certainly do better, I think, when at boys' school. But what's happened with the education process generally is that, if I may not create too much of a fuss before I do, I think girls learn cooperatively and boys learn competitively. And there is a difference in the way they learn. And if you're going to, if I may say so, feminize the school curriculum, or at least feminize the way the lessons are shaped and formed by cooperative learning and outcome-based assessment, so that you have assessment going on week by week rather than exams at the end of the year, I think that's the way girls like to learn rather than boys, and it disadvantages them. And there's a lot of research around that suggests that's the case. And I think that, and one of the reasons why boys certainly do better in boys' schools now is because boys' schools tend to be more traditional. They still tend to stick with the old ideas more than girls' schools do, even. So, and also there's another point worthwhile making, is that girls seem to do quite well in co-ed schools, and better than boys, really. So whether that's a case of the way education is delivered at the moment, or whether there's something else there, I don't know. But certainly that seems to be the case. And if I had a son, a grandson, or I could encourage that, I would think I'd be encouraging him to go to a boys' school.
Okay, Ronji, I don't really want to ask you this, but were you totally distracted with the girls at your school?
No, look, I was kicked out of my first high school, and it was a co-ed school. And my family actually tried to get me into a boys' school because of the culture, the focus, and the order that they could see within the boys' schools. But no boys' school in South Auckland would accept me at that time, which showed how much of a rat bag I was. And so I had to go finish up at another co-ed school. And I hated my time at the co-ed school because all of the stuff around some of the stuff that Bruce was just talking about and others, I really struggled with. And I was just there to try and eat my lunch and play sports, and I didn't give a stuff about school. And so I think when I think about boys' schools, I'm always actually trying to encourage my nephews and other young men and family members to send their kids to single-sex schools to get that culture, that focus, that order, that at least from the outside looks quite strong. And so I think I would encourage it more. I think we need more kind of public research like this to help prove, I guess, what we sort of know intuitively, that this stuff works. And to be honest, if I probably think that if I'd gone to a boys' school after I got kicked out of my first high school, I probably wouldn't have been as bad later on in my life because I would have had that culture, focus, and order that I probably needed.
Yeah, and Sheree, that's one thing that I mean, it is a generalization, but on the whole, when I think about single-sex schools, they are very aspirational, organized, very focused. Would that be a fair summation?
Well, I've never been to a single-sex school, so I can't really answer that question. But those articles that you sent us were quite interesting, because what they showed was that the schools were able to tailor to the specific needs of boys and specific needs of girls. So there was seems to be an acknowledgement in these articles that boys and girls are different. They have different needs. And so, for example, the boys' school, it talked about the secret source of high performance culture in boys' schools. Things like aspiration, brotherhood, a culture of high challenge and support, and a feeling of belonging. Whereas in the girls' schools, the things that made a difference was no gender stereotypes, no appearance pressures, no sexual harassment, no barriers to participation, and just having a school that's tailored for girls, where girls were able to have improved self-esteem, psychological and social well-being. I found that interesting. But I guess for me, I went to 3 different co-ed high schools because my father moved around. So I did get to see different kinds of co-ed schools. They were all state schools. And what really made a difference for me is the quality of the teachers, to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what it comes down to. Just finally, Ala, you were co-eding in Tonga, weren't you?
Yeah, both Tonga and here. I think I agree with what everyone said, but to Bruce's point, like the research isn't new, like this isn't new news. If anything, it affirms that there are only 2 sexes, male and female, and they have 2 different needs, and it applies in the learning context as well. I think what people are oblivious to, and it frustrates me as someone who's in the education sector, is that the feminisation of our education system has been happening under our nose for the past 20 years. Our teacher workforce is predominantly females, and in the boys single-sex boys school sector, it's majority male teachers. So obviously having that role model, the competitive element is key as well. I think for some women, they thrive in co-ed because they've got that competitive element with boys as well. That drives some women, for example, myself. Others need the cooperative sense. That's nice. But there are totally 2 different needs. And I think currently in MOE, there is this sort of not looking out for our boys because we supposedly live in a patriarchal society, and they'll write themselves because they lead in corporate and all that stuff. So that kind of anecdotal thinking is very prevalent in our policymakers in the education sector, which is why I think conferences like this, the all boys school conferences, are important, and they don't often get a look in because they go against what MOE is about, which is advancing certain groups over others, and boys aren't one of them. So kudos to all our schools.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think the recommendation... Go on, Bruce.
The all must have prizes is seeped into our education system.
Yeah. No, there's winners and losers. That is life. That is just what life is. So I think the more we soften our children, we're not setting them up to win in life as well. I think it's a failure of... But that's what our school system's already doing, but we don't need parents encouraging it as well, to be honest.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, speaking of soft, Ronji wants to go to bed. One of the recommendations out of the report was that in every area there should be access for both a co-ed and a single-sex school, so that parents can make that choice based on the needs of their child, which I thought was a pretty good recommendation. Anyway, we are out of time. Look at that. We have done very well. Thank you to the panel, Bruce, Ronji, Cherie, Christine and Ala, and we will be back again. 275 Māori. There we go. The South Auckland boy. We will be back same time next week at 8 o'clock. Until then, have a great week.